Here with Shashank Varma, and we've talked to Shashank before, and Shashank is leading an innovation initiative within Kohler, and I was wondering, Shashank, if you could share with us a little bit about what that position is exactly, and then maybe talk a little bit about how innovation is done within a large corporation. So I think uh, you always think of innovation as happening in small startups, but more and more big companies are wanting to have their own internal innovation initiatives. So can you share a little bit about how that works, innovation in a large company?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. And the effort that you're referring to, I founded a thing called Innovation Accelerator about 6 years ago, and really that was just the intent with that was I just wanted to get together with some other people within the company and just kick around some ideas, product ideas that we thought would be cool, and that evolved over time to become what it is today. So now, we do essentially two things. I have a small team, cross-functional team. So we've got a designer, another engineer. I'm a mechanical engineer by training. Someone from marketing. We have two engineers other than myself, a designer and a marketing person. So what we're trying to do is help other categories within Kohler Company solve problems, ultimately identify and solve the right problems as fast as possible. And the other is we try to invent, cutting edge stuff for Kohler Company. So we'll partner with a product manager or a kind of a business rep from a category, and we'll take a fairly vague statement like we want IoT in this part of a product lineup or something, and we'll try to make sense of it. What makes sense? How do our potential customers behave with that specific product, where something like IoT, for instance, would add value, and that we're not launching stuff just because we can make it.
Right.
And so
leadership embraces this because they're hoping maybe your work and your innovation leads to new products. Is that the idea, I would imagine? So.
Yeah, it feeds into our what's known as our product roadmap. We call that new product schedule. So it's our 5-year plan for new products, and that's what it feeds into. So, we don't necessarily have, or what this is attempting to do is to look beyond the 5 years and try to see what should we be looking at into the future, and can we get there now? How do we get there, as soon as possible? Okay. So speed is a huge thing with respect to stuff that we're not doing. So it doesn't necessarily belong in a vertical, doesn't necessarily belong in a neat little category, but there's a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and can we combine resources or kind of approaches to come up with something that's new?
I was mentioning to you earlier that I read a book called Orbiting the Giant Hairball, and I live in a bureaucracy myself. I'm at Concordia University. I love Concordia, by the way. Pay my salary. But, we have policies and procedures, and sometimes they feel kind of stifling. And I think big organizations have a lot of that. And this book, Orbiting the Giant Hairball, was about Hallmark cards and how they're a creative company, but they've really accumulated this big bureaucracy. But there's a small number of really creative, disruptive people that just need a little space from the hairball. But they need the hairball, like they need the support of the bureaucracy, but they can't be constrained by it in their creativity. It's like conflicting things. It's almost like love-hate relationship at Hallmark, what he was describing. Can you talk about how that works? Nothing specific to Kohler, because I think Kohler is like any large organization. You need structure and processes. But how does it work where you're innovating, where innovation is sometimes stifled by too much structure and processes? What's the interplay in the organization? So.
I think that's a really important question, because I think it's rooted in us maybe not, understanding innovation very well. I think, innovation is clearly a buzzword, right? Everybody uses the word innovation everywhere. I don't know of any speech by any leader, regardless of company, where they don't bring up innovation. So it's clearly something that's desired, but it's not very clear as to how predictably and reliably to get innovation, how to achieve it. And
Yeah.
I think innovation is an outcome. It's not necessarily, it's not like, let's do innovation. You get innovation as a result of work that you do.
Yeah.
And a lot of it, I think, is cultural. And I
Yeah.
think from that perspective, Kohler Company is potentially better than many other organizations. So when I was developing the Innovation Accelerator, I was cold calling a lot of people at other companies, learning how they did it, how they approached innovation. And I learned a lot about how companies from Google to Apple to Nike and others who are kind of known innovative powerhouses carry out innovation in their respective companies. And what it turned out that almost everybody has the same issues, everybody has the same problems. Bureaucracy is a common thread everywhere, and we love to hate on bureaucracy. It's just so easy. It's an easy target. One of the things that I learned was constraints are an incredibly valuable variable in the equation for innovation. I think it's very, I don't know if there is an equation for innovation, but if there is, that's going to be a huge part of it. And constraints allow you to focus. And I think the worst thing you could do with innovation is too much exploration, too much, if you don't have, if you don't have the right boundaries, then you're not just, blindly picking constraints. Hopefully, you're being clever and you're being thoughtful about what constraints should be constraints and which need to be pushed and which need to be opened up completely. And if you look at, programs for innovation that way, you could get a lot of really quick results. But otherwise, what ends up happening is when you don't have constraints, you don't get good direction, you don't really know what it is that you're trying to innovate, what it is that you're trying to do. I think innovation happens at every level in every company, but we typically think of innovation as like brand new products, brand new things, but really innovation is anything that's new that adds value, both to the company, to the market, in a corporation kind of setting. But the key, I think, to doing innovation well at these companies and the companies that I mentioned and at Kohler is just setting expectations well and being clear about what is it that we're looking for. Having those goals in mind and then telling them, okay, these are the tools that are available. These tools we might be able to get for you if you really need it, but we don't want to because they're expensive, for instance, or these things are off limits. And if you're able to kind of talk about it in those terms, then it becomes not just easier, but more approachable and almost predictable at that point. You're going to have good solutions because you know where you're looking and I need to walk these many steps to get there. It's not easy still, but it becomes much more achievable because you know what you're going for. And the contrary happens all the time where you've got maybe a small collection of people who are brilliant maybe, and they kind of are put in a room together, and then maybe leadership just expects cool things to come out. But you won't see them commercialized because they're not maybe in line with the company's goals. They're not aware of company's goals. But it's a nice PR story. Like, we've got an innovation team, they're doing some cool things. Oh yeah, they came up with technology, but they didn't, it didn't actually impact the world. If you're not aligning it to the company's goals that could actually, move the needle for the company and the world, then it's a wasted exercise.
It seems like it's a hard balance to strike, I think, because companies, I think, treat it kind of black and white. Either they constrain it within the bureaucracy or they give it too much freedom. And like you said, there need to be some constraints. And the idea of orbiting the giant hairball, the hairball is the bureaucracy and the processes and procedures and whatnot. and you need to be outside of that. You can't be constrained by it, but it has like a gravitational pull, because if you go off into space, it's a great emptiness and you're going to fail. And so you need kind of that tension between, you can't be sucked into the bureaucracy and constrained too much, but you need to have some focus, and there has to be that kind of interplay. And I think it takes a forward-looking company that can strike that balance and not treat it as kind of black and white. You can't be like, we have this wonderful bureaucracy, now let's put the creative people in a room and they'll make some magic happen.
Right.
They have to be given some direction, and then freedom.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a huge part of that is decisive and fast decisions.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to play in a space that's kind of new to everybody, including the people who are coming up with these ideas. It's fairly easy when you're tasked to lead something like that to go, well, let's see how this plays out. But it's really hard to say, yeah, this is not in line with what we want. This does not have potential, or it does, but it's not aligned with what we're going to do. I think Steve Jobs said, it's the hardest job is just saying no, but it's the most important job.
Yeah.
When you're developing new things, because it's so easy to get shiny object syndrome and things like this, right?
Sure.
You almost have a license to just go after anything that seems interesting to you.
Yeah.
That's what you're trying to rein in, because if you don't have that focus, if you don't have the right stimulus for those specific kind of end goals, you're just not going to get there, because you're not going to stay on the same path long enough.
Yeah, that's probably my flaw. I say yes to too many things, and I think Warren Buffett said the same thing. The key is learning how to say no to things. But what about, resourcing too? If you're, not to use the hairball analogy, but if you're too removed from the hairball is the source of the resources. So you can be off and innovating within constraints, but you also need the support of the organization to say, this is a good idea, we'll resource it now. Do you think that's an important part of the equation?
Absolutely. And it's also one of the constraints. So sometimes, one of the constraints is we don't have, these types of engineers, or this is the team, this is the size of the team that we have, and we have to beg, borrow, steal.
Yeah.
And when in the early days of the Innovation Accelerator, that was very real to me, because we didn't necessarily have any kind of funding or anything. We were just doing this on our own, after hours, so to speak. And I was struggling to just make everybody's time work.
Mm-hmm.
We're meeting for such a limited amount of time. I just felt like we weren't making enough progress. So just started experimenting with all these different methods, just to get speed and efficiency, because you don't want to just do stuff fast. You want to do them well too. You want to balance speed and accuracy. And so that kind of became a mission for a couple of years. And so I was just experimenting rigorously, and I was just trying to figure out what's the best way to use people's time. And so I've been able to incorporate everything that I've learned from methods like Google's design sprint. And that's a fantastic template. Right. Then there's scientific methods, super useful. The techniques that I learned in engineering school, which was kind of weird, because you don't think about, it's so strange how engineers sometimes don't think they're creative. Because you don't realize that process could lead to creativity. But I'm a firm believer in that now. I think process, and I've read about, I read about how creative people kind of go about their days, and the key thing amongst them all was a process and kind of building discipline. So even writers, they'll always write at 9 a.m. in the morning until 5 p.m. Whatever comes out, they will do that. And it's not like, well, I'm only going to work when the mood strikes me. That's what I thought you needed to do. Like, I need to feel, inspiration before I do something. But that's just, it turns out it's not true. From Jerry Seinfeld to, whoever, they all have set processes where I have a time every day, because you have to train yourself how to, come up with ideas, how to work on ideas, because if you're just going to wait for stuff to happen, chances of that happening over and over again, very, very low. So you have to train yourself to, do it at a set time. And I think I'm kind of butchering this quote, but it was by an author, and I'll forward it to you when I find it. But it was basically, I don't know about inspiration striking me, but it always seems to strike me at 9 a.m. in the morning when I start working.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I think discipline, even though it sounds, counterintuitive, it's really the way to do it. And I think resources and not having enough of them is part of just making things work. And I think it's better when you don't have everything. I think when you have everything, it's just, I don't know, it's distracting almost.
Yeah.
So I like a little bit of,
What forces you to be scrappy a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
I remember when I was in biotech, the CEO told me, because I was one of the people orbiting the giant hairball, he said, look, you got to treat me like a venture capitalist. You got a really good idea, pitch it to me, show me why it's valuable. If I like it, maybe I'll resource it and you can try it for 6 months and then I'll resource you more. And just, you got to treat it that way, like you're presenting to an investor, and you can do that inside an organization. You got to earn those resources. A lot of people feel disenfranchised or angry that they're not given resources up front, but you got to earn them. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I will say with that is, if you're in an organization, you're trying to make stuff happen, nothing beats investing in relationships.
Yeah.
I'm not, I've not been good at talking to people, and it's kind of, I'm a little bit of an introvert. And so seeing the value of developing relationships that you can leverage to get favors when you don't have resources, and you're like, can you help me out for half an hour? Can you help me out for a couple of things that I need help with? Just having a strong relationship that's genuine, that's sincere. You're not looking to do this just because you want to take advantage of them, obviously, but you're looking to help. You're looking to help them with their things, and you're hopefully, you get help in return, but you don't do that from the get-go expecting that you'll get stuff.
Yeah.
But relationships, I think, are key. One of the most important things, if not the most important thing, in being successful with any kind of effort, or developing any kind of effort that's not top down.
Yeah.
Yeah,
no, I think that's totally true within an organization, or even, with external stakeholders. I know, I think it was John Mackey with Conscious Capitalism just talked about how important the relationships were with all of his stakeholders. I think people overlook that in business. It's not some cold analytical thing.
No,
We're human beings helping each other, and we need that.
totally.
So, well, thanks, Shashank.